Hey there, self-care warriors. Welcome back to Self-Care Haven. Today I wanted to speak briefly on a topic that I touched on before in my video about therapists and complex PTSD and the importance of finding a trauma-informed counselor who knows about narcissistic abuse and is familiar with the effects of trauma on the brain. Now, it's probably no surprise that narcissists exist in every profession, including the mental health profession. So if you've ever encountered a narcissistic therapist before, or even one with antisocial traits, you're not alone. I actually have people in my life who have been victimized by narcissistic therapists, who've been invalidated, who've been re-traumatized, and some of them have even been targeted and managed down in a way in which their boundaries were eroded, their identity was eroded, their self-esteem was at an all-time low when they left the therapist's office. And this happens more often than we'd like to think. And a common misconception that we have in society is that if someone has a Ph.D. in something, that they must be able to help other survivors. And that kind of misconception, it could not be more wrong, especially in the field of narcissistic abuse. A Ph.D. on its own doesn't mean that you have the empathy, the compassion, or the knowledge about trauma that will actually help abuse survivors. In fact, I found that many people with these degrees and credentials, the more they brandish these credentials and the more they speak to other advocates in these condescending tones about their degrees, they are usually the ones who have these narcissistic traits. And they are usually the same ones who invalidate and re-traumatize abuse survivors. The ones who are very genuine in their mission to help others, they do not use their precious time and energy pulling down other advocates. They actually support other advocates who are doing important work for survivors. So if you have a PhD and you are spending time bullying survivors and advocates online, you don't just have a PhD, you have a PD, a personality disorder, and you should get help because you should not be anyone's therapist before you see your own. And I've seen this so many times with a few mental health professionals who have either no idea about the damage that narcissistic abuse can do, or they're on the more malicious end and they chose the therapy profession as a way to resolve their own issues. They didn't choose it because they wanted to help people. They chose it because they wanted a title. They wanted a title in order to make a name for themselves, and they wanted that title in order to become famous. They wanted that title so they could have their own sort of notoriety and recognition. They didn't want that title because they wanted to help people. They wanted it for themselves. And they're not out to actually help others. They're here to feed on others, just like narcissists do. So don't think that this type of profession is exempt from these types of personality disorders, because they can hide very well, and because they have knowledge of psychology, they have that extra advantage of being able to conceal their real intentions while eroding the boundaries of others. I will leave a link in the description below to a website called Surviving Therapist Abuse, which hosts stories about abuse by therapists, and if you're interested, you can check that website out. There are many mental health professionals who I really think are doing amazing work for survivors out there, and I will, also be recognizing them in my videos and my blogs. But I just wanted to take the time to talk about narcissistic therapists because it's a huge issue in our society. If we don't have the professionals who are supposed to help us, if we don't have those professionals following the same sort of standards of behavior and having that sort of empathy that can really help survivors to heal, what are we doing? We're just placing professionals in a field where they don't belong. We're basically paying these vultures to re-traumatize us. And obviously not every mental health professional is like this. It's only a few that I'm talking about right now, but unfortunately there's one too many who go out there and they feast on the poor boundaries of their clients, and they erode those boundaries and they erode their self-esteem. and they start to gaslight, they start to project, they have that superiority complex. And what they're doing ultimately is pathologizing people who are simply trauma survivors. And by pathologizing them, they're able to maintain that sense of superiority. And they're able to maintain these delusions of grandeur that they have because they have a credential behind their name. Remember, just because someone has credentials does not mean that they are an effective counselor, therapist, or even scholar. It does not mean any of that, because you really have to have the type of empathy and the type of life experience and the type of training that allows you to be trauma informed. And you cannot just gain that knowledge simply by having a Ph.D. I'm sure a Ph.D. helps you, but it does not ultimately define your work as a counselor. What ultimately defines your work as a counselor is your ability to empathize with survivors. It's your ability to pinpoint what is going to help that survivor to heal the most. It's your ability to maintain professional boundaries and to be able to understand what is going to be the most effective treatment for your client. And it's also your ability to check yourself. Do not get so haughty and superior that you look down on people who don't have credentials, or you look down on survivors who may have more knowledge about the type of abuse that they've experienced than you do. Because if you haven't experienced narcissistic abuse, you probably don't know too much about it, and that means that you are open to more education. Your education does not stop with a PhD. It is only the beginning. Do you understand that? I don't care if you're a therapist, I don't care if you have a PhD, because that does not impress me. What impresses me is a counselor who is empathic, who specializes in narcissistic abuse, who understands the effects of trauma on the brain, and who supports other advocates who are doing similar work for survivors. That's what impresses me, because that shows me that that person did not get their degree or get their credentials in order to make a name for themselves. They got it for the right reasons. They got it for authentic reasons. So that's my little spiel for today. Just be on the lookout for traits of narcissistic counselors. If you're currently seeking professional support, make sure that you are seeking someone who is trauma informed, someone who is not going to re-traumatize, re-victimize you, because this is a stage of recovery that is so vulnerable. And if you are, unfortunately, if you have the misfortune of coming across a counselor, and unfortunately I did encounter 2 counselors online who are practicing professionals who exhibit this type of narcissistic behavior, who are extremely haughty, condescending, and they have that superiority complex, and they're bullying other advocates. I've actually encountered those people, one of them on YouTube and another one on Twitter. They actually do this. Yes, it's true. They're out there. So don't be fooled. There are people that are hiding who they really are under their profession, under their credentials, and you really have to be wary of that, because there are going to be people who are out to take advantage of your vulnerabilities and your state of trauma. So be very wary of that. Look back at my video on complex PTSD and therapy. I'll leave a link in the description below, and you'll find that there are many mental health professionals that are doing amazing work for survivors out there, and I want to recognize them and honor them, and I'm so thankful for them because they know what they're doing and they're helping survivors. They're not harming them, they're not hindering their recovery, they're not re-traumatizing them. They're providing so much support and insight, and their brilliance and their compassion and empathy is remarkable. So I do want to honor those mental health professionals who are doing incredible work in the field. But I just want you survivors to stay cautious, stay wary of others who may not be out for your best interests, who are out for their own best interest, who are out to just make a name for themselves, to gain a following. I hope this video helps to put into perspective if you've had experiences with a narcissistically abusive counselor or therapist, or even someone who calls himself a scholar but really just put shame to that name. And yeah, those people should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, that's the truth. That's the honest truth. From the bottom of my heart, I hope that none of you have to face or endure re-traumatization by a mental health professional, because I feel like that is basically you getting hurt at the site that you are supposed to be helped, and it's not fair and it's not just. And we really need to continue to speak out about therapist abuse, because it does happen. Thankfully, there are amazing mental health professionals who are doing the type of work that survivors need, but we need more professionals in the field who are more validating and who are more compassionate, who are empathic, and don't have that superiority complex that could potentially battle the superiority complex of the narcissist who brought you to therapy in the first place. So, yeah, that's my spiel for today, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it validating, empowering. Let me know if you've ever encountered a narcissistic therapist or professional or scholar, and I hope to hear your stories and hear from you soon. Until then, take care.